I don't know when in my life I became me. Not in the esoteric sense, just when I started to care. For the longest time, moving between Shobutai and Heft, the only thing that existed in my mind was hunger. Well, that and the only other thing that really did exist was the name that was attached to me. At this point, I'm not truly sure who gave it to me, whether it was my parents or the fellow that sold me into slavery. All I do know is that I'm named for the falling artifacts in the sky, those large portions of metal that are quickly swallowed up by the desert sands that surround the northeastern United cities. And that's when my mind finally turned on to these objects. I was the property of a well-off samurai captain, a surprisingly kind one, as far as kindness goes with owning a slave. I was tasked with retrieving precious metals and raw materials for the captain, well, me and some twitchy hive drone that he owned. I learned a lot from that drone. Small techniques and ways to pick apart the rusted copper and metal. I guess he was a friend, though he never talked much and was always cheerful and happy someone had a use for him. But he didn't last long. As good and careful as he was, drones are fragile. A skimmer tore him apart, and I barely got away myself. The kind captain didn't speak much after that. I believe the drone's death affected him greatly, and the next thing I knew, I was given freedom and kicked out the door. I didn't think much of it and knew little else, so I just immediately went back to tearing metal apart in the desert. It was strange. I never saw anyone else salvaging these deposits, and I never thought of why. And it turns out, once more, it's because of the skimmers. I was gravely injured that day, but fate seemed to want something else from me. I was saved by a man with a katana, a common weapon in the United Cities, especially among the samurai guard and its police. But it wasn't them who saved me. It was a lanky man wearing nothing but black rags and a basket over his head. He grabbed me and ended up dragging me to the criminal center of Shobutai, the shinobi thieves. I was aware of who they were, and I thought they were going to either imprison or rob, but that's not what happened. I received medical treatment and food. They treated me exceptionally well. But they wanted something from me. They wanted my help to bring Hanish into the city. As over the years I was such a regular on bringing materials in and out of the city, the guards simply never bothered to check me anymore, and they were proposing a lot of money for me to do so. A place to stay, food, and a bed. I wasn't about to turn down easy food and profit, and for years I continued to do what I always did, bring in materials and sell them, just with a little bit of Hanish hidden inside the bundles I brought back. And as I stayed with the thieves, I learned many things, how to read, write, and became interested in the things I was bizarrely unaware of before. Firstly was skeletons. They weren't creatures of flesh and bone. I mean, obviously they weren't, but it just never registered before. They didn't eat, and I could scarcely begin to imagine how they functioned. Even some of them continued to talk with their heads removed, and there were stories further from the south of headless skeletons that attacked the scant few travelers on those routes, and there were even legends of a giant skeleton that lay amongst the cliffs of the southern lands. What I began to rapidly understand is this is some form of lost technology, ridiculously advanced, something so far beyond us that even the sacred phoenix of the holy nation was nothing before it. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know why it rained blood in the west, why skeletons could scarcely remember the ancient times themselves, why pillars of light scorched the desert in the south, and what were or are the hives. I think that's when I awoke, when the world began to expand so far out in front of me that I had a hunger to consume all of it out in front of me, no matter where its end may lay. But before I could reach the end of the world, I had to start somewhere else. To raise a pillar of understanding, an attempt to re-establish knowledge in this barren world, currently draught in the dogma of the holy nation and the authoritarian hedonism of the United Cities. And perhaps I should make an attempt to understand the one thing I fear and hate most of all, the Skimmer. Horror stories abound with the existence of this creature, often greatly wounding the best equipped samurai squads and often making disdained nobles vanish, not to anyone's real concern, outside of the interests of Tengu's council. The skimmer is a massive insect, distantly related to the ones I used to sustain myself on. But unlike their smaller cousins, skimmers tower even over the tallest of the races, perhaps standing at least 10 feet tall on all fours, and more than double that length from end to end. Strangely, unlike other insects, this one has chosen to hold two of its long legs aloft far above its body in a resting position. As well, this is because these act as the insect's primary weapons, with two sharp points held at the end. A skimmer will lash out these legs at a distance, trying to keep whatever it is after at bay, long enough for its prey to slowly bleed out and die. As well, I surmise that the skimmer, while hidden, will often lash out these legs, grabbing prey and pulling them down under the sand, though I have never seen such behavior to support such a claim. The main body of the skimmer consists of two parts: a light brown and fleshy underside speckled with dark circles that travel down the sides of the insect's body, which is made of 12 compact individual segments. Along the back of the skimmer sits the only armored part of the insect's body, covering roughly 3/4 of the skimmer's back. I believe this is a possible defense mechanism against a rather terrifying predator, though one, as far as I know, barely share the same environment as the skimmer. The breed of creature is known as a beak thing, a towering monster I could easily imagine slamming their heads into the sand and ripping through the skimmer's armor to get to the meat inside. Moving on to the head of the creature, this is probably the oddest feature compared to the rest of the insect's body, which are rather uniform to the more typical smaller insects of this world, at least in a way. The head comprises of white flesh that seems to cover up the eyes that the creature has or once had, and the flesh itself extends out into 5 feather-like stalks that spread out like a fan from the top of the skimmer's head, 2 sticking out from the sides of the head, while the other 3 grow directly from the top. On the face of the skimmer sit 2 large bulbous plates that seem to cover up what remains of this creature's eyes. Vestigial, I believe the old texts refer to it as. Features and adaptations that a creature simply does not rely on anymore. Below the plates are a set of 4 fangs that the skimmer will often deploy to stab at targets, often as a last resort option, though it seems to lack any venom and it acts merely as nothing more than a large stab. Below this sits the ever-closed mouth of the skimmer, appearing as a slit between 2 plates. Behaviors of the skimmer. The skimmer doesn't act like most predators of these lands, as anything else will often stay behind and eat whatever they tend to kill. But this isn't the way of the skimmer, as it almost has a much more simple behavior and response to outside forces. The skimmer at a baseline tends to act very aggressive, attacking anything it comes across, in what I can only describe as either an act of cruelty or one of blind rage, as even despite its size, a single skimmer will often attack groups much larger than itself and often fail, resulting in their own death, though the same cannot be said for a large group of skimmers, often leaving few survivors of whoever they come across, yet never eating or lingering around after a kill, always sauntering off into the sands instead. Aside from killing and endlessly wandering the Great Desert and many of the surrounding arid regions, the only other behavior of the skimmer that I have noticed is its sleep and or ambush tendencies. When not on its endless violent hunts, the skimmer, either alone or in a group, will lie flat against the sand and then using their massive legs will begin to shift the sands rapidly beneath them until their entire lumbering forms are hidden well beneath the sands, save for just their rather bizarre heads that always remain above the surface, resting in the ever-present winds. Many believe that this is how skimmers either sleep or act in some form of ambush behavior, but I think there is a bit more to it than that. In fact, I think this is how they eat, and any aggressive behavior may simply be nothing more than the skimmer clearing their feeding grounds out of immense irritation of trespassers. Though, to be more specific, I believe that the skimmers feed off the winds themselves, taking in the smallest bits of metal, water, and salt that blow in from the coastline, collecting them within the large feathers on their heads, and then uses the mentioned materials to progress the collected metal through a accelerated rusting, and either deriving energy from the process itself or eating the rust itself that the process produces. Though, if this is true, why do the skimmers not eat off the larger metal structures that are strewn across the landscape. At one point, I believe they may have, but over time, as the metal structures withered and became stripped of the metals they did eat, the skimmers whittled down into the form and population that we do know of today, passively eating yet highly territorial creatures.